Hey, Mr. Wally, Lions Hall existing conditions presentation.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Mr. Town Manager. My name is Dave Wally. I'm the Director of Public Works and Municipal Facilities, and I am joined tonight with our gentleman, Dan Tenney, representing Weston and Sampson. Try to be brief because I'm sure we're all anxious to go watch Yankees wrap up the ALDS tonight. Although I hear they're in rain delay.
Maybe not, you don't know.
Just a little bit of humor as I know we are all long awaited.
As the former manager of the Boston Red Sox, we'll see what happens.
The report on our findings with the Lions Hall. Brief history. Earlier part of this year, some concerns and issues started to swirl around with some of the structural deficiencies of the formerly known Lions Hall. And at the same time, the Lions Hall membership was also contemplating whether or not it was viable to retain maintenance and upkeep and take care of a facility of this age. Some parts of it dating as old as 250 years now. So in June, we were informed from the Lions that they did intend to remove themselves from the facility and turn over complete operations and maintenance of the facility to the town of Londonderry. We assumed those duties and responsibilities on September 5th of this year, and we are now paying for electricity and other types of services that are required of a facility of this age. Currently without budgetary numbers for that, but that is something that we'll be talking going forward in the budget cycle coming up the beginning of November. So the numbers that you'll see before you tonight were challenging, to say the least, to kind of get our heads wrapped around what could be some potential uses for the facility and not having any real firm concrete understanding as to who will work in the facility or what use will it be or what will it become, its useful purposeness for the town. That was a challenge. We're in challenging times right now in the marketplace as well, and Dan will speak to some of those issues as well as we go forward in the presentation tonight. So we're just looking forward to an open mind. We have three basic approaches tonight on what could be done with the facility, and certainly there are more. There's the obvious do-nothing approach and what have you, but we try to approach it and give you three options, at least for consideration, and then obviously for lots of future discussions so that we could then better gear exactly what numbers we need to go after in order to do what is inevitably decided with what we were going to do with the facility. So that being said, I'll start the presentation with Mr. Tenney. Thank you.
Sure, thank you for the forum this evening. We have just a very brief overview slideshow of the work we've done and the information we've generated so far. If we could see the next slide. Just to briefly introduce who we are. Weston Sampson is a multidisciplinary engineering and architectural firm. I'm part of the facilities group. We have roughly 30 or 35 architects and support specialists that do building work. The rest of the company does all manner of infrastructure, energy, sustainability, environmental consulting. So I think there may be another click on this slide. There we go. Thank you. This is just a slice of the services that we bring. So we're able to evaluate facilities and do preliminary design, final design, construction with really all of the disciplines that are needed in-house. So what we've done, next slide, please. This is us. This is the team, very briefly, that has worked on the Lions Hall so far. This is just a small slice. There are others who've been involved and have given us input. But the key players have been obviously our management level principal, me, lead architect, another architect, a pair of structural engineers, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineers, and hazardous materials specialists. So what we've done is to look overall at the building, not in great detail. No destructive testing or anything was done, but we needed to familiarize ourselves with the building to understand what kind of structural systems it had, what condition they were in, general architectural elements, both the exterior, obviously very familiar and prominent building in its location, how it's laid out inside, how it works, what kind of building systems, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, which it does not have, code compliance, both building code. We looked briefly at zoning requirements. It's an existing building, so compliance there is a little more flexible. And accessibility. So those are the kind of the big ones that really give us a picture of the condition of the building and the opportunities and challenges to redeveloping it. The report that was just handed around has quite a bit more detail that I won't go into about individual elements of the building and what condition they're in. It's generally in pretty good shape, but it is, as Dave pointed out, it's old, parts of it quite old, and tired. At present, there is one significant element of structural distress, which is the floor in the main hall, which is sagging considerably at about the back third of that area, which appears to be failure of some of the actually more recent structural repairs that were done. Beyond that, for a building of its age, it seems pretty solid. We did not do any destructive testing to open up walls or ceilings to see what might be present there, but the visible superstructure in the attic of both the front part of the building, which is newer, and the old original hall are pretty solid. It's got a very interesting, as you can see in that photograph there, very interesting post and beam truss arrangement, which I'd never seen quite that arrangement before, and it seems to be holding up quite well. You can also see in that photo some of the old knob and tube wiring, which is, we believe, has all been abandoned and disconnected, but you can never be completely sure of that. So what we did based on our understanding of the building was to come up with 3 scenarios for potential redevelopment. And those are really 3 somewhat arbitrary possibilities at this point. One, and really, as Dave pointed out, based on no clear understanding of what the building would be used for in the future after the Lions Club has departed. So these all assume that the basic configuration and usability of the building would stay pretty much the same. Pending, further design, further discussion with the town, a more detailed program, a more precise set of building requirements would come out and might change some of the recommendations that we present here. So we have three scenarios. One is extensive renovations of the building as it is. So essentially restoring it to the greatest possible degree, really with the view of a 50-year effective lifespan before you have to do that again. That's pretty much the limit of what you can project doing, given the type of building it is and what we know about the kind of maintenance and repairs it might need over that time. A second scenario, which is limited renovations, which is really a shorter term, maybe a 10 to 15-year scenario where major repairs are done, but you don't do wholesale replacement of mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems. And it really just brings it up to better condition, but pretty much as is. And then as a reference for the first 2 scenarios, what would a new building cost to build to essentially duplicate the spaces that are in there now? And that's scenario number 3. So we developed cost estimates for those. Again, they are somewhat arbitrary because we don't have a detailed program that would tell us things about the necessary configuration of rooms, how elaborate a kitchen might be, for instance, whether there, would be classrooms, whether there would be offices, whether, there are a lot of unknowns at this point. And those are presented, I think we can actually go to the next slide, which won't really change what we're discussing. Thank you. So these were the items we looked at, and you can see people, I'm sure, are quite familiar with the building, and in some cases it's in great condition, and others, as I said earlier, it's tired, and a lot of what's in there needs to be renewed. So the redevelopment scenarios each come with a price tag. Next slide, please. And the comprehensive repairs and renovations is probably the most expensive, and that comes with an estimated bare construction cost, and I'll explain that in a moment, of $382 per square foot. That's the price that you would probably expect to pay to the contractor. That does not cover contingencies, does not cover soft costs that the town would incur in redeveloping the property, professional fees, some insurances, some associated costs. There is a more detailed budget in the report that you have for each of these scenarios. It does include those costs. But again, they are a useful relative snapshot. I think the relative costs of these different approaches are going to stay pretty much the same. But we are in a very uncertain and volatile construction market right now, and it's very difficult to project prices with any great degree of certainty. It's always sort of black magic anyway, but it's worse now. So I think anyone who's even gotten a quote for a new roof recently is probably familiar with that. There are material shortages, there are labor shortages, there are supply chain delays that can be surprising. Garage doors can be hard to get, and they can hold up a project for 6 months. That kind of thing is happening. So we don't know when that's going to stabilize. So these are really not intended as firm prices. These are just a guide to the relative costs of things. So the next slide, please. So this is the less expensive option, probably the least one. That's about a third the cost of a full renovation, but it does not get you a new building. It does not get you a building that's really suitable for the next 50 years. It's going to put things to right. It's going to leave the existing heating, cooling, electrical systems essentially as they are, with some I call housekeeping upgrades, so that they're clean, they're suitable for use, they're safe, but they're not new. It would also not provide accessibility to the second floor, which now is lacking. There's only 2 stairs, there's no lift or elevator. And ADA would require, or NC 171 would require a lift to access all areas of the building for full compliance. And then the last scenario is demolition and new construction. That's a little bit cheaper than the full renovation. This is a bit deceptive because it's assuming that you would do this on the same site. This is not really, if we had an alternate site, could we build the same square footage and usability? What would it cost? This is a little bit of an artificial comparison, just for reference. It's a little bit less money, but there may be some associated costs that we don't really know yet, pending a final design that could be more accurately priced. So that's kind of the overview. What we also outlined were the next steps. So what would you do if we were to proceed to a more detailed investigation of the building and a beginning of a design that would address a specific set of needs on the part of the town? So what that all adds up to in the end is what we refer to as a basis of design, which is essentially a report that lays out the requirements for the building, the expected configuration of it, probably concept design, plans, elevations, site plan, depending on the extent of site development that is required, cost estimate, permitting requirements, timelines, and all. And that then is your sort of your Bible going forward. That would be what we would recommend doing next if the town wants to proceed with a more detailed development of these scenarios. One point to very quickly, one point to make is that in any of those scenarios, there is hazardous material to be tested for and possibly abated in the building, given its age. There could be almost anything. We know there is vermiculite insulation, which often contains asbestos. There's a pretty healthy population of bats and or mice upstairs in the attic, so that's a hazardous building material. There may be other things that haven't been tested for. We would do that in the next phase.
They're just tenants, right?
Sorry?
Bats and mice are tenants.
Yeah. They're the only ones now.
Right, right.
So what I'm really looking at is if I want to go down the inexpensive route, I'm really looking at 1.5 million.
Probably something in that range. Yeah, yeah. When you add in all the associated costs, which tend to be, they don't track the dollar figure of construction exactly. And in that budget are some assumptions as to the extent of structural repair. For instance, that's one big line item in there. And we'd have to do some more invasive testing to really characterize the work that's needed.
So the building was built in 1769. It was relocated in the 1870s. It has sat in that same site since the 1870s.
Yeah, it looks like
You're
that.
saying, all things considered, it's in good shape.
What we can see above the ground appears to be. We couldn't get under to see the crawl space under the front of the building. It's pretty shallow. So we
I know
don't,
somebody who went under there.
Yeah.
we need someone who would like to go under there because I'm not going under there.
There's a gentleman in the room that might volunteer again. I don't know.
I don't know that he'll
might not
necessarily
go under.
volunteer again,
Yes.
but he gave us enough information to understand what we were dealing with.
Right, good.
Okay, so this is what you do every day?
We do this every day, yes. Yeah, and there.
What would you do?
It's always different. What would I do?
I have an historic building, which is of value to the town.
Sure.
I'm reasonably sure if, demolition is, would be not tenable by most of the longtime residents of the community.
Right.
What would you do?
My first step, my instinct is to preserve the building. I like it. It's got, as you can see in that photo of the.
Thank you.
I'll be totally honest on this. I love the old post and beam framing. That attic over the hall is, pretty unique. The challenge, though, is knowing what the town needs the building for, because that really is the key to coming up with a scenario that really, does it right. Because you can quite easily spend a lot of money restoring a building like that. But if you don't do it with an eye towards how it's going to be used for the next couple of generations, you may be wasting money. So that's really, I think, the key. And that's a question I can't answer for myself. I'd love to see that, restored to something like it looked, at some point in the past. That's always an interesting question, too, is what's historically appropriate for a building that's already been altered and moved and used in different ways over the years.
And
Well,
I think to just add to that, that's how we kind of got to where we are now. The building, had a roofing issue, so it had an issue with the roof, so they quickly put a roof on it. We, had siding issues, so they put vinyl siding on it. They, had an issue with the floor, so we took a stab at one approach. This would actually be the third time that the floors had been dealt with, as I understand it. And, and then there's other elements to the building that aren't in concert with the historical value and preservation of it. You have some concrete blocks that are used in the front for planters and whatnot. So you have a lot of different types of textures and materials that have been used that take it out of the historic society type of way of looking at things, but nonetheless, the architectural design and view and look of the building is quite unique and should be valued and cherished as it is in Londonderry. So that's where we're at the crossroads. Is do we just keep dealing with an issue, and then the other challenge is if we're going to open it up, that we, the town of Londonderry, are now going to make it a public facility. It certainly is going to have fall into other types of compliances that all municipal facilities have. So rather than just dealing with one issue as it pops up, and some of the mechanical systems in that building are aged quite as well. And so when you have a building, and I'm sure Dan can speak to it as well, when you don't have an occupant of a building and you set the thermostat as low as you can to try and conserve energy, you don't air condition it, a building of that age can also more rapidly deteriorate in time. Should we just kind of, move everybody out, set the temperature down, and lock the doors? We are going to winterize the building just to make sure that nothing does go wrong with freezing pipes and whatnot. But that's where we are at this point in time. So we're just looking for some general consensus as to where the town views the usefulness of the facility and
Yeah, 1 second.
whatnot.
Yeah, I'll just make one statement, then I'll put it back out to the council, is that when this was brought to me initially, someone came to me and they said, the best thing to do is we need to tear this building down. I said to that person, I said, I'll be happy to buy the rail that they'll run you out of town on. So I don't really see that as, I see this as a, historic building here in town that we need to figure out what to do with. That's at least my opinion. I'll open it to the rest of the council.
Question. Do you know whether or not there's a ceiling on that main hall now that covers up the structure? That's quite interesting.
Yes.
Can that, if that was refurbished, could we open that ceiling up so people could see the structure and the old craftsmanship?
I think the quick answer is yes, you could.
Okay.
Because the ceiling that's there now is a couple of feet below probably the original meeting hall
Okay.
ceiling.
Yep.
And there's ductwork and lighting and electrical stuff in there. Now, in the the limited renovation scenario, we did not assume that that would be taken down.
Okay.
More likely, it would have been, well, it's a little hard to tell because the framing of the attic it's got a barn quality to it.
Yeah.
And if it had been a barn originally, it would not have been finished. It would not have had a ceiling at
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
So a little more research might be interesting in that.
Okay.
It does come back to the question of how it's going to be used. Is it kind of an exhibit space, or is it a function hall, or a meeting room, more like this, or a theater, which, it's been used for with the stage. So the intended use will kind of inform that. Our assumption in the full renovation scenario was that we'd take all the insulation out of both ceilings, partly because it's vermiculite in some cases and it's contaminated in others. Put a new roof on with the insulation in the roof itself, so that those attics can be warm.
Warm
as the normal
space, as you
building heat.
mentioned.
You can put your mechanical equipment up there, there's a lot of space, and that frees up space down below. So, not a complete definitive answer, but
That's all right.
a start,
Got it.
a start.
Well, we're only at the starting point.
I found it interesting how you mentioned in your report that some of the beams yet dated back to the 1700s, but
yeah.
it looked like as if they were repurposed
They
as well.
definitely were. If you look at some of the framing, you'll see, like mortises and maker, or carpenter's marks, I guess they're properly called, that don't correspond to the way they're put together now. That was very common. Nobody wasted anything back in the 18th century. And if you had one barn coming down, you were going to use the parts to make another one. And I'm sure that, a really expert architectural historian could go in there and tell you stories upon stories about what that probably was and where it might have come from.
So my question, maybe whoever can answer, with the previous tenants, the terms of the agreement was that there was no, that they covered all the costs. The hall was rented out, it covered the costs of everything, there was no cost to the town, is that correct?
Under the most recent iteration of the lease, and I apologize, it's been a while since I've looked at this, but yes, that's my recollection, is that under the most recent iteration, and there were many of them over
Yeah.
the 45-year period, that was the arrangement.
So, being that the building is vacant, that financial burden now shifts to the town.
Correct.
Do you have an idea of what that dollar amount is?
We do. We've begun to price that out in preparation for budget season. Dave really has taken the lead on that, but it is, it's a great question, because in addition to, the soft costs, the contingency costs that are associated with the construction, there are other costs that are associated with using this building as a town facility. So those are the carrying costs, the electricity, the water, the contracts that are associated with that building, the trash, things like that. But then there are also costs that arise based on what the use of the building is going to be. If it is going to be rented out, there is an increased strain on municipal resources that would likely carry a cost with it. And you can begin to imagine a number of different scenarios where the use of that building is intensified that it has associated costs as well.
So as the chairman had.
We could also rent it back to the Lions.
Right, and I would agree. I would agree that we're not in the business of rental, and I think that if there's someone else that can do it better than us, but I would be interested to see. And as the chairman had pointed out, we're in the early stages, so I don't want to get too granular. But I would be during budget season. I'd be interested to see what those numbers are, so we can furnish to the community. Here's the cost that it currently is. It was nothing earlier. Yes, there might be some improvement costs, but ideally, we could potentially go back to the original terms and with the tenant that we had prior. Thank you.
I'm getting texts of people who are volunteering to go into the building.
Go under it.
I guess
Okay.
people want to keep it.
Yeah, I think the report is value, and thank you for doing it. I don't think there's any question the next step has to be that we have to understand what we want to do with this building. And that's very apparent to me, whether that we get a group together of folks from Historic Society, few people from, that really know building requirements, and then some people from the town that can really get together, working group, and kind of get the T's crossed and I's dotted as far as what we want to do with it. That's the natural next step, I think, so.
Yeah, I think those comments are well taken by me, Mr. Vice Chairman, and to the extent the council wants me to organize an effort to ascertain what the community's desires are, I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to structure that as the council would like to see. There's a number of different ways to do it, surveys, charrettes, committees, you name it. We can do it. But it is important, and I think the last thing I would say is I think it's also important that we not rush it. We need to get it right. We are coming into budget season. It is tempting to want to solve this in one fell swoop, but I think that comes with risks, and we should be cautious about that.
Just the area of where it sits is just of such value historically and just in the center of our town.
Correct.
It's got to be done correctly.
Correct.
So this falls in line with, I know you were working, I don't know the stage that it's at, the policy for our buildings.
Correct.
And
We actually
how
have
that's gonna set. So personally, I'd like to see a real detailed list of what you were just saying, what the expenses are and what the costs were. And I'm sure the Lions have given that to you, broken down as to what they paid and what it costs.
They've been very generous. I should just note for the record, they've been very generous in sharing that information with us. It's been very helpful. They've gone above and beyond in that way.
No, and I think that data is important for the council to look at.
Correct.
And I agree, this is a great historical building. We want to preserve it as well historically as we can. It can be used by the schools as a teaching education as to, look, this beam's exposed. This is how they used to do things. People can actually get educated from this building. It would be nice if they had the lights that they lit up in the attic and dropped down, but I didn't see those there. But on your two comparison, I would love to see the full-blown one compared to the limited one and be more detailed. Because some of them I'm looking at, like, I just like to see really, there's a cost difference, but what actually are you saying? Like, is the, so just a I gotta put my glasses on, sorry. Just to point out one, when you talk about, like, the substructure, the new foundation, and slabs, and you say it on both of them, and you say that the quantity is 1, but on one it's 150 and the other one is 75. Like, what is the difference? Like, I'd like to see that so that, we can kind of, like a la carte, we can kind of build my own burger here and say, this is really important, that slab, so that water isn't going underneath it and destroying it anymore. But on the other hand, when you're talking about the stairs, is it as important to go this higher price? Do you know what I'm like?
Sure.
I think it all plays into part. So I don't know how much work that would be
Well,
for you to do, but
We can certainly break it out in more detail, but the caution I would offer is that, again, without the big picture, it's kind of hard to put them in the right perspective, because what we've done there is, with some of those, large round numbers, the 75,000 or the 150,000, they're a guess, they're an educated guess at this point.
yeah, because like I'm looking, for example, you say plumbing, right? It says quantity 6,355, but
Right.
on the limited, it's 1,500. Plumbing, what do you
Right.
mean? Pipes that you're going to replace?
It's-
I mean,
actually, that-
I
yeah.
don't.
I can definitely give you more detail there, because.
That, I mean, I'm not looking for like detailed, just kind of so I can understand what it means.
Sure.
Because I mean, there's a couple of them like that, like this one here, the mechanicals, right?
Yep.
It's saying, again, you get the same number, but one's 10 and the other one's 75, and it's a difference of 400
Right.
on one and 63 on the. I mean,
That's a big number, yeah.
right? I mean, I just think that
Sure.
to make a
Sure.
to make a good assumption of steps, and yes, what we're going to use it for comes into play.
Right.
Personally, I think it should
Let-
pretty much stay
let-
the way it was, but
let
that's my
us-
own opinion.
Let us do this. We can, a lot of what's sort of missing there, I think, as you point out, is there is some narrative that kind of says, this is what we're doing, and then over here is what the cost is.
Yeah,
We
and
can
if it
just
could be
point-
like this, side by side
Yeah, yeah,
when you show it to us, just so to go across, it would be a lot.
sure.
Easier,
And it may be simply, this includes X and this does not include X. That's a lot of what it is.
Yeah, just so, and then maybe we can kind of say, to give you more direction
Sure.
along with what we want to do with the building, and say, this is what we would like to spend the money on, because that slab's important.
Yep.
But I'm making this up, I don't know, the mechanicals may not be as important
Right.
at this
They're-
moment in time.
They're pretty important,
But I mean, at this moment in time, the
Yeah.
basic
right. And,
part might be suitable, and then
sure.
put a plan together into how to update it further at a more cost affordable price, but the building is at least saved
Right.
and being used and function, and in my thought. And,
Yeah.
I just have to say, you talk about buildings being left empty and cold. Let's talk about the Morrison House. It's been there since the 1700s, and it doesn't have heat or air conditioning, and it's not in bad shape if you go inside of it. So that being an those old buildings were built to deal with cold
They were.
and
they were.
heat, and they were built very, very well. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't have issues, and I think Ann Champer is in the audience, and she, really should work a lot on, because she knows a lot about this stuff.
Sure.
But thank you for taking the time to do
Okay.
this. It
No.
really is important to the town.
No, our pleasure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question regarding the previous work that was done on the floor. When was that repaired? What time frame?
2014.
2014, and it's already in disrepair?
One portion of it, yeah.
Is there any form of warranty or anything that we can?
We already went down this path. That company's no longer in business.
Yeah, and I can speak to that as well, Mr. Chairman, is that in New Hampshire, there's both a statute of limitations and a statute of repose. The statute of repose says even if you weren't aware of a defect and you discovered it, and this is in the construction area, after a certain period of time, you just can't go back and try to recover for damages, even if you weren't aware of them until the floor caved in. And the other thing I would add is in the context of the floor, I can't remember exactly what the construction cost. It was I think in the $80,000 range, which is a lot of money to you and me. But I can tell you, as somebody who reviews the legal bills, it doesn't take very long before an effort to recover $80,000 becomes a question of how much good money do you want to throw after bad. And so there would need to be a very careful consideration given to, is this worth the town's effort?
Gotcha.
Dave,
Thank you.
The number was closer to 50, wasn't it?
Yeah, I actually came across the numbers last week. It was 47,000, north of 47,000 for that material, and then it was the change order to add insulation to it for another 2,500. So it was close to the
That would be
$50,000.
eaten up in a week.
Yeah.
So 50,000.
Yeah, I believe when they tore that up and everything, we probably should have, there probably should have been some other things we probably should have done. But what we learned from that was, from the individual that went under the building is that the original foundation, which is still in place, I think, in some tongue-in-cheek is I didn't need a flashlight because there was plenty of light coming through the foundation for me to be able to see.
Yeah.
Which means, in other words, the water was coming through, the water was running under the building and had, had reset the footings. So that's why the floor gave out. And for those that don't know, the floor is part of what holds the sides up. So that's why we have a problem. So, all right, well, we're going to get into this in budget. We're probably going to have a very serious discussion about whether it goes on the warrant or doesn't go on the warrant for the voters to vote. That would be one way we'd find out whether or not the community wants to fix it or not. But I don't know whether it will or it won't, but we will have a very serious discussion about it and bring it to a head.
Great.
Thank you.
Good.